Welcome to our workshop session. The purpose of this workshop this afternoon is to dig into a little bit of what we talked about this morning. At the end of the plenary, I talked to you about this product that STARTALK is going to be making available at some time in the not too distant future, although we don't know exactly when, but probably we're talking about 2, 3, 4 months at the most, certainly before springtime programs, before summer programs begin, on checking for learning. And what I wanted to do this afternoon was to kind of go into just a few of those little sections to give you a little bit of information about them in a little bit more detail. So just as a reminder, this product is addressing sort of 8 important questions. The first question is, what do we mean checking for learning? So in substituting that assessment term with checking for learning, this is going to give you more information about the background of why that term would be a good substitution. Then how do I know what to check? When do I use formative and summative checks for learning? And since we know in STARTALK programs that you're going to use more formative checks than summative checks, how can I use formative checks? So some real guidance about the kinds of checks that you can use to check for learning in a formative way. How can students check for learning? So this is really, I didn't talk about that in any detail this morning. This is really about self-assessment. Students checking for their own learning. How can I, as a teacher, give effective feedback to students? How can I report progress of learning in meaningful ways? And how can external assessment help in checking for learning? So the 3 that we're going to look at this afternoon, and we're not going to have time to go into tons of details unless you're willing to stay until 7:30. Are you? Okay, motivated learners. If you're willing to stay till 7:30, we can go into detail about this. If not, you'll get the Cliff Notes version, which will be done by 3:45, right? So what we're going to look at this afternoon is, how do I know what to check? So we're going to start with that, look at that a little bit. We're also going to talk about, how do I use formative checks for learning? So we're going to get very specific about that. And then we're going to talk about, how do I give effective feedback to my students? So those are the 3 questions that we'll dig into this afternoon. So let's start with the first one. How do I know what to check? And the very first thing I would say about that is, here's our context. Our national standards for foreign language learning provides us that first stop context about what we should be checking for in terms of learning. So this looks very familiar to many of you, right? The Olympic rings. Oh, not really, but close. And these words that you see up here represent what? The what? They represent the 5 C's, okay? So the 5 C's, as we see here, I'm not going to read them to you because you know these by heart. If you'd like to stand and put your hand over your heart, we can recite these. I guess if I turn this toward my computer, it does better. Okay, so these are the 5 C's, and the 5 C's are our standards. Is that correct? So let me ask that question again. The 5 C's are our standards, right? Right. Let me ask that question again. The 5 C's are our standards. Is that right? Some of you said no. Why are you saying no? What are the 5 C's? What are the 5 C's? The 5 C's are the 5 goals in our national standards. They are not the standards. So I make that distinction now because this is important that we understand this as STARTALK leaders, and certainly that our teachers understand this. This is the broad picture information. These are not the specifics. So these are the goals of foreign language learning, but they are not the standards. So they are the big picture for us. But then we have, how many standards do we have? Anybody know? Anybody know how many standards? Are we going to have a standards workshop this afternoon? 11. We have 11 standards that are nestled under the 5 C's. Now, for example, if there are 5 goals and 11 standards, they all don't have the same number. So there's one goal that has 3 standards to it. Do you know which one it is? Communication. And those 3 standards correlate to what? You didn't know you were going to have a test this afternoon, did you? The modes of communication. Now, I'm kind of glossing over this information very quickly, but this is information that our teachers need to have. So in the document, when you have access to the product, there's going to be information about the standards there, but it's also going to link to the source document as well. So this is something that our teachers need to have information about. They provide a framework for everything that we do in foreign language learning. But it is a sort of big picture that our standards provide to us. So my intent this afternoon is not to go into detail about the standards, but to say, let's put them in their place. They are the big picture in which everything about foreign language learning should be nestled. But then if we move from framework to more specific, we know that better learning happens when learners know where they are going when? Every day. The standards are big picture, but we know that learners need guidance every day. And this is not a luxury, it is a necessity. That motivated and empowered learners, as we talked about this morning, need to know where they're going. They need to perceive that what they are learning is something that they are interested in. Remember that conversation this morning about motivation? And they need to know if they got there. And if they didn't get there, they need to know what they need to do in order to arrive at that point. So, motivated and empowered learners need targets that they can shoot for. They need direction to shoot for. And we're generally the ones who provide them that information. So what I want to ask you to do in a second is I'm going to ask you to turn and talk to someone sitting near you. If I were you, I would choose the smartest person who is near me. And I want you to answer this question: what does the term learning target mean to you? So would you choose someone, talk to them right now. What is a learning target to you?
Yes, otherwise it won't make sense. Yeah. So, and then I understand and I know how I can use it.
Like in real life and research.
Yeah, because it's not memorization.
If I could ask some of you to share, what did you come up with? What does learning target mean to you? Can I have some volunteers? Raise your hand. You're going to speak really loud?
Yeah, use my teacher voice.
Great.
It's where the end product, where we want our students to be.
So it's the end product of where you want students, what you want them to do. Is that right? Okay. Some more definitions of what a learning target means. You're going to speak really loudly.
To me, learning target is I plus, whatever is wherever the child is, at least nothing, if nothing, at least 1 plus. Wherever he is, just one step above from it. Say one word, say one sentence, say one lesson or a story, whatever it is, it's an I plus.
Okay, so you're saying that it's stretching the learner
Right.
a little bit more than what he's currently doing.
Because everybody's individual. Their learning capacities are different too. So I cannot promise what the result is going to be in the morning. I will decide where I reach in the evening when the child is leaving. So for me, it's an I plus 1.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, and you're going to use your teacher voice?
Yeah.
There you go.
I think learning target means what the child wants to learn, what is his liking, and that is his learning target. If he wants to learn English and I am teaching him Hindi, he won't learn. So that's what I mean.
Okay, what his target is for him individually. Okay, right over here we have another comment.
I'm thinking smaller or more specifically, something like what the learner or student hopes to be able to do at the end of any sort of activity or lesson, like be able to talk about his preferences, his likes or dislikes, or something more concrete is what I'm thinking.
Okay. Okay, so it's something that really focuses his energy and attention, right?
And I also think that teachers can set different learning targets throughout a program or a course. So it can be a learning target for the day or for the week or for the month. And then they use, I guess, the standards and the 5 C's to see if they've met those learning targets for the week or day or lesson or whatever it might be.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this discussion for right now because there's going to be plenty of time for you guys to talk further about this. But it sounds to me like what you're saying is that a learning target is something that gives the learner focus for his efforts and energy. It can happen on a daily basis or a weekly basis or even maybe for a unit or a semester. So good learning targets, first off and foremost, are clear and focused. So they are stated in a way that students can easily understand them. So we use very student-friendly language. And as I said to the workshop group this morning, you cannot overstate student-friendly. Think of the easiest, most friendly way that you can speak to a kid. Use that language and the learning target will communicate to him in his language what he wants to learn. And finally, good learning targets encourage student buy-in for 2 big reasons. They are what we know kids would be interested in learning, and secondly, as you said, they are within their reach of ability. It may not be exactly what they can do right now, but think Vygotsky. With the help of an expert other in my zone of proximal development, I can reach a new place. So that's very important for us to keep in mind. Good learning targets are shared at the beginning of the learning episode. Now, learning episode sounds not quite so friendly to us. A learning episode really is a lesson. We're talking about a lesson. And for the sake of the discussion today, whether or not you agree with this is the definition I'm going to use. A lesson begins and ends on the same day. I know that some people say, I have a lesson that goes for 2 or 3 days. That's fine if that's the way you want to define it, but in my estimation, that's 3 lessons. They just happen to happen over different days at different times. But a lesson is going to be, for me, the learning experience that happens on the same day so that the kid can focus his efforts and energies. So the learning target is shared with students at the beginning of the period. Why would I do that? Why would I share the learning target with the kid at the beginning of the period?
So all the focus will be on that same target, so the student will be able to help the teacher to bring more ideas or incorporating all the ideas together to reach the same point.
So this is for the purpose of focus, right? So I want to help my learners be able to focus their efforts and energy in this learning episode. Remember the motivated, empowered learner. Remember that. We have those kids in our programs. We have those teachers in our teacher programs. So what do they need? They need to be able to focus their efforts and energies on something. Well, we need to know what that something is at the beginning of the learning episode. Then we need to, for our students for sure, we need to post these learning targets, and they need to be visible throughout the class. Why? Somebody raise your hand. Tell me why we should post them and leave them there for the whole class period. Can you speak loudly?
Yeah. Students know what is expected from them for that lesson and what is their learning goal.
Say it again.
Students know that what is expected from them and what are their goals.
Okay, so they know what's expected, what their goals are. So you might be saying, well, this sounds very prescriptive. I intend for it to sound very prescriptive. This is not Greg talking. This is what our research is telling us about effective teaching. That effective teachers let students know what the learning targets are. They state those learning targets in very friendly language, which invite the learner to invest his efforts and energy in those targets. Those learning targets are posted throughout the class period so that the student can refer to it when he or she needs to, so that the teacher can refer to it. by the teacher during the lesson, and also they can serve as a checkpoint for students at the end of the lesson. So we're talking about getting rid of those compliant learners that I talked about in the opening session this morning, and really focusing our effort and energy on these motivated learners. I like to think of this when at the end of a lesson, a teacher can return to the learning target and say to the kids, so this is what we said we were going to be able to do today. Can you do that? When the kids say that they can do that, it's like putting a bow on the package. They've really got a nice little present in their hand. I was just in a school in Asia just about 3 weeks ago, and I was in a kindergarten classroom where the teacher, the language teacher, had led his kids through a 40-minute lesson, which was beautifully done from beginning to end. And he did exactly this. He advised the kids what they were going to be able to do. He gave them the agenda of what they were going to do, just in a very sort of summary way. We're going to do this, and we're going to play this game, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to sing that song, and then we're going to talk about what we were able to do today, and the lesson is over. At the end of the lesson, the kindergartners, at the end of the lesson, he said, now, so boys and girls, we said this morning that you were going to be able to do this. Can you do this? And he and I had watched them do it, and they said, so master teacher, he looked at the kids and he says, okay, get with your partner right now, and I want you to show your partner blah, 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 which was the learning target. The kids did it. And he said then, now, can you do that? And they said, mm-hmm. So there was just this disconnect, cognitive disconnect for these kids who weren't able to really monitor very well for themselves, but needed the reminder that yes, they could. That is powerful. And what that does is it respects the learner, and it puts power in the hand of the learner. So I went to the website where we have some of the STARTALK model curricula. I think there are like 9, 10. David, do you know how many units are up there? It's at least 9 or 10 units that are posted there for you to use, take, steal, use them all you want to in your programs. And I just pulled some of the lesson learning targets there. And here, I'm not going to read them to you. They're big enough for you to read. You can see what they look like and what they sound like. And here are a few more. You might think to yourself, I think I could say that a bit more friendly, or maybe less scientific sounding. Go for it if you can. Make the language as student-friendly as you possibly can. But this gives you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of learning targets. What do you notice about all of these learning targets? What do they share in common? Yeah, can you speak loudly?
I'll try it. It's all about what the student can do.
Okay. Okay, it's what the student can do. How do you know it's that?
Because it says I.
It says I can. It's not the teacher I can. This is the student I can. So this is positioning the learner. Because can someone raise your hand and tell us often how learning objectives or lesson objectives are sometimes worded?
They're in the third person.
For example, the student will be able to. The student will be, how friendly is that? Is it speaking to the student? It's speaking about the student. So it's the student is the object of this, not the reason this is happening, but it is the object. Some of you may have even seen in lesson plans teachers who abbreviate, student will be able to by SWBAT. Don't even write it out, just swab it right there. Will be able to do whatever. So what we want to do is make sure that our learning targets are written in this friendly, easy to understand language. Now, in our workshop this morning, one of our participants said, I don't have any trouble writing unit learning targets. I have trouble writing a daily learning target. So look at the learning targets that you see up here. Do they look like they are all achievable in a lesson? Are all of those learning targets achievable in one lesson? Or could you take one learning target and that one learning target could be achieved in a lesson? So you're some of you are shaking your heads like this that no, they couldn't. So what does that mean for us about those learning targets? What would we have to do to those learning targets? Break them down, drill them down. And that's perfectly fine because a unit should have bigger learning targets that can be broken down into daily learning targets. So if I had thought about it, I could have put this into the PowerPoint so you could have seen an example of this. But I don't have to do that. You can look at some of these right now yourself and go, oh yes, I can see that that could be broken down into some sub-bullets. Those sub-bullets become daily learning targets. Okay? Thought you might like to hear a testimonial from some very important people involved with learning targets.
Targets are really good things so that way, instead of just writing words on the wall or something, we wouldn't know what to do, because what if there was just a bunch of words up there and we didn't know what it was for? And we would be all like, what am I supposed to do? Is this reading, writing, math, or is it social studies?
I think learning targets are when you know how sometimes you forget what you're supposed to be doing. You can just look up on the board and be like, oh, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
I think learning targets are instructions to help you know what you're supposed to be doing, and also to give you something to work, like a goal to work at.
Learning targets are useful because if you just like doze off during class, or you kind of like fall asleep or something, and then you wake back up and nobody realized, then you would know what you're supposed to do. You can just look up on the board. I think it would be setting an expectation for yourself, like saying I can multiply large numbers. So if you can't, you just have to keep working towards that goal and the expectation.
I think learning targets are a little boring, but they're actually to help you learn. I mean, I know I don't like school, but that's all I can say for this.
So I could have edited that little boy out, but I decided it was good to let him say what he wanted to say. But these are little kids who are probably third graders, maybe fourth graders, who are in classes where learning targets are routinely used, and you can see their take on them. So I've given you here, and you're all going to have this PowerPoint. It's already been given to the STARTALK staff. It may be uploaded as we speak. If not, it will be soon. But here is the website where the model curriculum, I see Roseanne in the back of the room. I know you worked on these curriculum documents. They are phenomenal. And they're a great starting place and finishing place for some of you. So I would suggest that you take a look at them. Here's a QR code if anybody wants to snap it right now and go to it, you can. But that's the information for you. There's another document I thought I'd give you too, that if you are not real confident yet about writing learning targets, another place to go for some samples of learning targets is this document right here, the necessful, actful, can-do statements. Necessful sounds like a terrible Ebola-related disease, but it stands for the National Council of State Supervisors for Languages, who worked collaboratively with actful to create this really very powerful resource for us that provides us information about sample can-do statements, look guys, at different proficiency sublevels. So this one is for interpersonal communication, and this one is for presentational writing. I just sampled these out for Novice High, and this one is for interpretive reading. When you look at the Necessful, Actful, Can-Do document, don't look at it as these are the only things that kids can do at this level of proficiency. These are just examples of the kinds of things. But it will give you some other ideas of the way to write can-do statements. So I commend that document to you. So the next thing next section I'd like us to go into is how do I use formative checks for learning, because we made the case this morning that STARTALK student programs particularly are really perfectly positioned to take advantage of formative checks for learning. And so we want to take a look at what we might find out here. What is a formative check for learning? I would say to you clearly that a formative check for learning is any instructional activity that you do. Any activity can be a formative check for learning, because all you're doing in a formative check for learning is giving students an opportunity to show what they can do for the purpose of illuminating how much they can do and what is left for them to learn to do in order to complete the task. So any instructional activity can serve as a formative check for learning. It provides an opportunity for the student and teacher to find out if the student gets it, and helps determine what might still need to be done. And there is no mystery, because any of the instructional activities that you use can be formative checks for learning. They tell us who is and who is not understanding the lesson. They tell us what the student's strengths and needs are. They tell us what misconceptions I might need to address, misunderstandings from students. They tell me what feedback I should give my students. They let me know what adjustments I should make to instruction. They let me know how I might need to group my students for further learning. And they let me know also, or they advise me about the differentiation that I might need to exercise for my students. So what I would like to do for you right now is, even though I've said to you that there's no sort of silver bullet about formative checks for learning, that they can be any activities that we do, nonetheless, there are strategies that we can use across a lot of activities that will help us check for learning. So I'm going to ask for some help with passing these out. All right, so we're in a part of our workshop today where we're going to explore a little bit and look for some concrete strategies that we might use to check for learning. What's the difference in a strategy and an activity? Can somebody tell me what the difference between a strategy and an activity is? We have a microphone coming to you.
We use the strategy to achieve the goal. We use it in the activity to achieve the goal or the target.
Okay, so which is broader, an activity or a strategy? The strategy can be used in many activities, right? So I'm giving you a lot of strategies in that document that you have today. By the way, this document is also going to be a part of the product that we talked about this morning. So once that's released, you'll have that. So here's your challenge right now, is that we're going to explore what we have in this document. You're already broken into your groups, forget the 4 to 5. I want you to take time to scan through the activities, and then I want you to decide which ones do you think would be highly useful in your program, whether you're using it for teachers or for students. How many of you are in student programs, or you have student programs? Okay, put your hands down. Are the rest of you teacher programs? Raise your hands if you're a teacher program. So you can use these throughout. So whatever your program is, are there strategies / activities there that you think hold better promise than others? Okay? Start.
Where do you stand on the national standards? You know, how much do you know? Well, I'm an expert and I'm a complete beginner or whatever.
I know, it's a great check.
It really works
I've seen it used
well.
in K-12 classrooms where, as a check for even homework, you know, like if you think it's this, go here, and then talk and come to a conclusion. Or, you know, so it allows students to get into different corners, and then I think in my mind the important part is that they talk with one another and come out with a product. Because just going to the corners and standing there doesn't do much good.
Yeah, you have to discuss what it is and why you put yourself in that spot.
Defend your position.
I've done it where they line up according to some arbitrary characteristic. So I know a lot about cooking, French cooking, or I know nothing about French cooking, and they line themselves up according to their abilities. And then we mark off 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they join groups. So it's kind of it's one way to get
get groups that are on a similar ability level.
or even different. If you have them count off, there
I
are
see what
different
you're saying.
ability levels. So anyway, but I like this the way it's described. I think it would be good.
Well, and the nice thing too is that you've got them up and moving.
It's a big difference. I don't know if you were in meeting and Laura Terrell's thing, about that's very significant to think that if they don't get up and move every 10 minutes. Did any of you see that blog post about the teacher who had to, I think Laura Terrell talked about it this morning, the teacher who had to shadow a high school student. I mean, she was exhausted. Right, but it was dreadful what you learned. I mean, how boring it is. And if they don't get up, I mean, think about last period of the day. Gone.
So this one is also for really not novice, because they need to be able to read unless it's in English. But then, first grader, can you ask first grader this?
You can, well, we have to be careful. You have to be careful about, are we talking about age or are we talking about proficiency level? Because you could have a very...
I'm talking because we have elementary kids,
Yes.
So...
But I think we could do this with a younger age student, even if it's just looking at images or videos, their perception of some things might be changed. For example, we saw the video earlier in the morning of how people eat in different countries. Maybe they have an idea that everybody eats with chopsticks. Maybe you show them images of people eating with a whole variety of utensils or not utensils.
I still think that it is really you want them to convey the true meaning of what they are reading, because these are quite sophisticated. If you look at the changing attitude, I became more aware of, I was surprised about, I felt, I related to, I empathize with. So you see, these are really even the language, I think, and the concepts, sometimes they are not really as easily understood by a young, I'm talking about, really first grade student asking these questions. I'm not sure whether they will be able to answer you based on what we want to get out of them. That's what I mean.
In our program, we use edit very often, almost every day. After the whole day, before you walk out, you will use the edit flip either one sentence or one topic or one single word. Depends on how they learn that day. So we use this a lot. And Fall Confernece is another activity we did almost every day. Okay, and we have like a student checklist, can do statement. We'll do it like every 2 days or 1 week. Also depends on students' learning program. And my opinion journal, once a week at least, one time. Okay, so it's pretty much about those.
So this your program is elementary or middle school? Or?
Well, fourth grade to eighth grade.
So another thing we need to identify is for beginner is it's for beginner level.
For beginner level, and return next year is like a 3 weeks of period, and come back is another 3 weeks. So it's like a 6 weeks learning experience only.
A lot of the beginner level activities or strategies would be things that require are more movement based or interpretive, because they're not quite at the presentational or writing or so a lot of the activities that are like moving to the four corners, it's just interpretive, it's at the very, very beginning level, or exit slips or drawing that are not quite requiring, or a list of words. I think that was one of the first ones. Quick write, you could do a list of words related to food for beginning level.
And for the older kid, like 8th grade, 6th to 8th grade, we use the photo finish for the final product, So.
I can't do this, I just can't. And now you can. don't tell me you can't anymore, show me. You've done it already once, do it again.
You know, sometimes combining two things, like for example, if you're doing journals and you're asking them with pictures, but also thinking maps, where you can have them think and plan and then take that and write it in a journal, then that becomes also combining two strategies or activities together to get that language out.
Exactly, and then the thinking maps, you don't have to use full sentences. You can use snippets, like, I know this word, I can write that one down. I know that, I can write that down. And then, you know, just make them kind of connect the dots. Add in pictures when you don't know the word.
It's a good way for teachers to teach students accuracy, to get in that grammar component indirectly.
Right, because you can go through and edit together when you read it. But
she had, I can't even remember the word, I wrote it down. But she said, write this word down and remember it. And then she just kept coming back to this word and nobody knew what it meant. And it just kept weaving through the lesson. I like that example. How we assume that they know what a word means, but it really doesn't. Yeah. Somebody at your table looked it up on their computer. So they knew
your kids would do it too.
Yeah, that's why they took a
Yeah.
the cell phones.
Well, I remember being totally flabbergasted with things that I thought were such easy cognates. I was reading something in French and the word was dune, but they didn't know what a dune was.
Yeah. Oh,
so
right.
We do take things for granted.
They don't. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
do you think the checklist is good for that? Is that the...
Especially for heritage language. So you could have a statement or a recorded word, and then they could say whether it's colloquial or whether it's a formal register. They could identify the register, and if they identify it, that's part of the process. They're noticing that there's a difference,
right?
And isn't that half the battle, is to get them to notice the difference in register. In heritage research.
Until they kind of internalize it that way, they can't make the change, right?
This is the tip of the iceberg. And when the document is made available, the product is made available to you, you'll have many other resources as well. But again, remember, any activity that you do can be a check for learning. These are just some strategies that we know work. Our colleague over here mentioned to me that, well, a lot of these are writing. What about oral checks for learning? And the product, the new product, connects to some other pieces in STARTALK that are already in place. There's a video component of STARTALK called Checking for Comprehension. And in that, there are a lot of strategies that are talked about, and the checking for comprehension strategies are very similar to checking for learning strategies. And so the document will have the link to that information as well. So going back to this product and the document, our idea, as we envisioned it at STARTALK, is that this new Checking for Learning and STARTALK student program product is supposed to be a one-stop shopping place for you about the topic of assessment or checking for learning in STARTALK student programs. So if it doesn't have the information described, it may link to other documents within the STARTALK site, or it will link you to source documents out in the broader internet community. Iman, Iran?
These activities can be adapted so they can be also verbal. Not only written.
Absolutely.
We went over the strategies and we identified several of them that could be adapted and changed so that even the beginner novice learners, they can do it by drawing,
right,
by show of hands. So, many of them are, relevant to any.
Perfect, perfect. And so if it achieves the purpose of helping you think about adaptations, it has achieved it. So that's great. We only have about 29 minutes left. I think this session ends at 3:45. Am I right about that? And you're not willing to stay? Is that correct? I wouldn't ask you to do that because it's a long day. But I do want to move us toward the last part of of the wheel that I want to dig into. And I'm going to tell you, 30 minutes on this topic is nothing. So we're just really throwing a pebble across the pond. But if you want to know more about feedback, which is a fascinating topic, let me recommend a book to you by the author that I closed with this morning, Susan Brookhart, and it's a really mysterious title called How Do I Give Effective Feedback to My Students? Oh, look here. Or how to Give Effective Feedback to Your Students. It's a wonderful book, and do you see how little it is? It's not a big fat book. It's easy to read and a wonderful ideas about feedback, because as we're going to see in this next section, feedback is very, very important to the learners that we're trying to grow. So why is feedback so very important? Well, it's critical for improvement. That makes sense to us. If you're interested in learning how to do something, if you don't get feedback, you lose interest because you don't know how well you're doing. Motivated learners must have it. We made that very clear this morning. It provides non-judgmental information. More about that in just a second. It opens up a dialogue between teacher and student, and it empowers learners. So feedback is very important in the equation. Our research, there's tons of research available right now about the need for improved student achievement. Because if you read the newspaper or you read any magazines that have to do with current issues, you know that our nation has an achievement problem right now. We are, in terms of the 65 nations around the world who participate in the international study to measure student achievement in math, science, and reading, we are in the middle of the pack in this country. So there's a lot of research about or a lot of study about why that is. And what the research is showing us is that the most critical factor in improving student achievement is the teacher. It's not the class size, it's not the school, it's not the materials, it's not the zip code, it's not the zip code the children come from. The most important factor is the teacher. That's the biggest variable in the equation. And the other thing that's really important is that it's not what the teacher knows, it's what the teacher does. So it doesn't matter that the teacher has the highest academic degree possible. What matters is what the teacher does in making decisions about how to teach kids that matters so much. John Hattie, who obviously has no life. Can you read that? He looked at 8,000 studies, and he's done a whole lot more since 1992. But John Hattie made the following comment from his studies, that the most powerful single modification that enhances student achievement is feedback. And he says, because of that, the simplest prescription for improving education must be dollops of feedback. What are dollops? Yeah, it's a spoonful of something, like put a dollop of sour cream on that baked potato. Okay, so we need dollops of feedback in education for it to improve. So, but what is feedback? Feedback is just in time, just for me information, delivered when and where it can do the most good. Turn to the person sitting next to you and tell them your favorite part of this description. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but every time I hear her say that or I read those words, I get a warm, fuzzy feeling. How many of you said just in time is your favorite part? How many of you said just for me is your favorite part? Me too. How many said when and where it can do the most good? All right, those are our hardcore people. Grant Wiggins said it in not such a warm and fuzzy way, but he gets to the point. He says, feedback is what was or was not accomplished given a specific goal. So this is information that the learner has to have in order to improve. And I want to impress again, motivated, empowered learners who do not get feedback will not stay motivated and empowered learners. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. The power of feedback lies in its two-pronged approach, and that is that it addresses both cognitive and motivational factors at the same time. It addresses cognitive factors in that the student finds out where they are in their progress and what they need to do to improve. And it addresses the motivational aspect because students realize this is within their control and it is something that they can improve upon because I'm not going to give them I plus 12, but I plus 1 to deal with.
All the time. Every single student? Yeah, with every single student. So I like it a lot, and I wonder if there are ways to adapt what they're doing, but do it somehow differently so that it's practically possible.
It could be a peer approach.
Since they're taking, for instance, in the last episode, if they're taking the time to sit down with a student and analyze his writing, the instructor should really ask for evidence, because saying, oh, do you think that you're engaging the reader? I think so. You really should ask for evidence so that the student understands and is actively aware of what he's doing specifically while he's writing to engage the reader or express.
Right, and the comment that I made about how he said the author shows that the author is interested. Yeah, I was interested when I was writing this. It doesn't mean that it shows.
Right.
Observations about what you guys said at your table. Some volunteers about what you saw. So we need a mic over here. All right. And you can, if you'd like to summarize or if you want to just give your point of view, that's fine.
A lot of what we said is all 3 teachers gave positive feedback and were very supportive to the students so that they helped the students learn as opposed to giving negative feedback right away and then the student just shutting down and not trying to get better. So each of them were empowering the students to better themselves.
Great observation. Okay, another one right over here. It's coming. And somebody else get ready.
We were just talking about how each of the teachers was trying to actually demonstrate and show to each of the students where the improvement took place rather than just talking about it. So actually showing them where the progress had been made, and I think that was very helpful.
Okay, perfect. And we're going to come right over here for this comment while you're doing that. So the kids knew what it was they did that got a better result. Okay?
I guess as a group we discussed how difficult it is to actually sit down one-on-one with a student and provide such feedback. And so in the last episode we felt that the instructor really didn't ask for evidence. It was a good approach to start with self-assessment, but the instructor did not ask for evidence of that, right, of the writer's voice and how this person engaged the reader. So maybe it would be more productive.
I would agree. And this morning we observed the same thing, that I'd like for the kid to say, well, why do you think that, right? It was a good beginning of a process of helping the student learn how to evaluate his own voice. My favorite part of the last video was how the teacher praised the kid for his strong voice. And you could just see this kid's chest sort of swelling up, which he says, you're a great writer in that regard, or I can tell you like writing. Well, you never know when these words of encouragement are turning points for kids, right? So this is really important stuff. So I've got just, like 6 or 7 minutes before I need to wrap up. And so I want to tell you two very important things about feedback before we have to go. There are 2 types of feedback that you may already know about. If you've done research in this area, you already know. But they are evaluative and they are descriptive. And they have different effects on learners. So let's take first the evaluative feedback, and I'm going to give you some examples of evaluative feedback. Grades, A, B, C, D, F, those are examples of evaluative feedback. Letters, numbers, words, excellent, good, poor, symbols, written comments, good work, stickers, oh no, we're going to send a lot of people out of business now. Evaluative feedback sums up achievement and assigns a label. It expresses judgment. Summative feedback is not intended to engender conversation. Summative feedback is a dead end. It is the end of the experience. And we write about this in the materials that you're going to get from STARTALK. If you're giving kids back a paper, for example, and you put a grade on it and you expect feedback to happen after that, forget it. Once you put a grade on it, you have closed the feedback loop. So if you want kids to continue to engage in feedback with you and in the feedback loop, you cannot put a grade on it because that is the end of feedback. Descriptive feedback, let me show you some examples, is value neutral. It avoids praise or blame. It focuses on the intended learning. What was the purpose of this and how did you do? It shows where the work is right or wrong and why. It pinpoints strengths and identifies areas of improvement in terms of intended learning. It takes into account, oh, this is so important, the amount of corrective information the learner can act on at one time. As teachers, because we are teachers and we want things to be right, we try to fix everything at one time. And what we've got to do is learn how to prioritize because the learner can't handle all of that. In fact, the research, the psychological research tells us that if you want to improve on something, work on 1 or 2 at the most things at a time. So we have to focus our feedback for our kids. It models the kind of thinking students will engage in when they self-assess, and it can be used by students to take action or improve. It does not cause the learner to shut down. And somebody made the comment earlier, it doesn't cause them to stress out. So descriptive feedback offers information about the work, the product, or the performance relative to the intended learning. And what our research also shows us is that when evaluative feedback is decreased and specific descriptive feedback is increased, students learn more. So this is a huge, very important lesson about feedback. So I'm going to show you some examples of feedback, and let's see if we can figure out, are they evaluative or are they descriptive? Here we go. You solved the equation. However, you need to include a written or visual explanation. Turn to the person sitting to your right, have a conversation. Is that evaluative or descriptive? And why? Okay, someone raise your hand and tell us what it is and why. Someone raise your hand, a volunteer, before I call on a victima. No victims, no hands, no volunteers. Roseanne, you take a stab at it, because I know you know. Roseanne knows everything. No, I don't know. But you're near the boom mic, see?
I think it's descriptive because it states where the student's at currently, and then what the next steps are for that student to improve.
Is that the right answer? Yes. Of course it's the right answer. Now, here, it could have been a little bit tricky. Does it feel evaluative? The tone does, doesn't it? Because it's just the facts, ma'am. Here it is. No fluff, no muss, here it is. But it is actually descriptive because the learner knows where he stands in what he was supposed to do and what he needs to do to improve. That's your biggest indicator about descriptive feedback. If it does not give the learner a way to improve, it's dead end and it's evaluative. Make sense? How about this one? I liked your behavior during the task. It's evaluative because do I know what I did that she liked? No, she just, so what have I got? I have to think back through what did I do so that I can repeat that, whatever it was, and that might be 12 things, but I don't know what it was. And finally, your model of the solar system does not show the proportions as provided in the data. Turn to your partner. Talk about it. All right, thank you. Thank you. How many of you said this is evaluative? Raise your hands. Put your hands down. How many of you said it was descriptive? Raise your hands. Someone who said it was descriptive, why did you say it was descriptive?
Because it's just saying that the person did not reach the goal. The goal was to show the proportions. The proportions were not shown. However, there's no room for improvement. So it's...
So that sounds like you say it's evaluative.
We amended the statement and we said that it's descriptively evaluated.
And Which political office are you running for? All right, so let me tell you quickly that it is descriptive because I know what I need to do to make it better. It says that I did not show the proportions as provided in the data. So if I show the proportions as provided in the data, I can improve. So that's the question. Now, I agree, but still, it got you thinking. And the point of this is, it's really not the tone, although I don't think I would use this tone with kids. But the point of this is, do you know how to improve? And you do. So you'll say it differently and you'll make it more warm and fuzzy. All right, so final thing that I want to tell you, and again, my apologies for making this so fast, is that feedback is all about these things. The student first must demo what he can do, because if I don't have a product in front of me, I can't give any feedback. So the student demos. Next, there is feedback. Next is that the student must process the feedback. What happens next? Repeat the process. Demo. This is what is critical, and this is what is often left out. Feedback without the opportunity to use the feedback is meaningless. Don't waste your time. So think of it like this: feedback must be an iterative process. That means that kids use the feedback to make the next demo. They then get more feedback. They then process more feedback. And then what happens? We start it all over again. So you decide, as the teacher, you decide how many times we're going to go through this, but the purpose of this is getting better and better. I don't think tomorrow when I get on my plane to go home, I don't think my Delta pilot got in the simulator and only tried to land once. I think he got lots of feedback and that he had please tell me he did, lots of opportunities to practice before going. That's what learning is all about. It's having the opportunity to show what I can do, get some feedback, take that feedback, improve, and show it again. Well, you guys have been great this afternoon. I'm sorry that it's had to be so breakneck, but this gets you into the product a little bit of what you're going to be able to have access to in a couple of months, okay? Thanks and enjoy the conference.